Picture a practice that whispers through the ages, rooted in ancient rites and yet reborn in the age of the internet, self-expression and personal power. A realm where candles, herbs, and moon cycles are woven together into rituals seeking connection with nature and the unseen. Welcome to the world of modern witchcraft here on Things Visible and Invisible. Phoenix LeFae is a witch, teacher, ritualist, and author with nearly 3 decades of experience in modern witchcraft. She draws on traditions including Druidry, Tarot, and Wicca. She has written and co-authored several books on witchcraft, ritual magic, and joins me down the line from her home in California. Phoenix, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, Phoenix, when I first came across your work and your website and stuff, I was sort of scratching my head, as no doubt many of our audience are thinking, really, witches in the 21st century?
Yeah, really witches.
You do exist then?
We do exist, I promise. And there's probably one closer to you in your neighborhood than you realize.
Well, I'm not sure I need to know about that just at the moment, but let's dig into this a little bit more. When you say the word witch, people have an idea of an elderly woman living in some forest somewhere with a large pot and
Yes.
Casting spells or whatever. First of all, how did that image of the witch come about?
Yeah, it's an interesting lineage and history of this word witch because it definitely instills a certain feeling or image, just like you said. And, once upon a time in our history, and this is really Western European history, there was the older woman who was either widowed or her family had moved on or whatever, and she lived at the edge of the village. This is a real historical thing that happened over and over again. And often this is someone who would be skilled in herbal remedies or would be the midwife or would be skilled in some other sort of healing art or making charms, love charms, things like that. And because the witch has always sort of been seen as the outsider, it was very easy to label this villager as the outsider. And over time, as Christian influence became more dominant in the cultures of Europe, that term got overlaid with religious fear. And so there was fear instilled in the outsider, in the woman who knew how to make charms, in the woman who understood how to use herbs for healing, because if you know how to heal, you obviously know how to cause harm. And so there was this cultural shift, and a lot of fear was instilled in this idea of the witch. And, that's still hundreds of years ago. And if we fast forward to now in the modern witchcraft movement, which really sort of started in the late 1800s, there was this appeal to having this word have fear behind it, to label yourself as something other, to label yourself as something outside of the dominant paradigm. So, yeah, there's a long and interesting history around that word and the people who choose to, or don't choose, have that label put upon them, or the people who choose to take on that label.
I mean, you're probably aware of, Phoenix, that the default for most people, rational or irrational, when they hear the word witch, is one of fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
There's this, looking at our cultural context, there is this fear of the unknown. It's a normal human reaction to have fear of the unknown. It's totally normal. And in our zeitgeist, right, in our cultural context, witches possess power. And some of that's fantasy and some of that's interesting reality or spun in an interesting way. But because witches are supposedly able to control and manipulate unseen forces, that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary, especially if you have fear about being on the bad side of those forces or accidentally making a witch angry and having repercussions from that interaction, right? So I think it all boils down to this fear of the unknown, which is so beautifully human. But it's just about, I think if most people realized what modern witchcraft especially looks like, a lot of that fear would go away.
Yeah, you're making me think, just as you're speaking, Phoenix. I mean, I suppose the fear is that somehow they will cast a spell on you, you know,
Yeah.
that they will somehow, as you say, negatively impact on people's lives. And although we live in a very secular age, and I'm sure you're speaking in California, I'm in London, and we're surrounded by a very secular culture, we also
Yes.
live, I don't know if you'd agree, in a very superstitious culture, where even people who are very materialistic or very secular are still very freaked out by people like witches or whatever. Is that your experience too in, say, California?
Yes and no. I live in a very interesting little hippie bubble in where I am in California. So for the most part, when I meet someone who isn't familiar with witchcraft, if I use the term modern witchcraft or Wicca, there's some amount of familiarity, right? So I am in an interesting little bubble where it's pretty progressive, pretty on the spiritual front end, I guess you might say. So it's not really something I run into all that much. Plus, I run a little metaphysical shop. So most of the people who I interact with are seeking out that vibe. They're seeking out that energy, and they're curious about their spiritual life and their spiritual pursuits. So I don't run into the fear, although it's been over 30 years I've been practicing. And I can say, especially as a young person in my teens, I did run into fear. I remember very clearly once reading a book in my science class about Wicca, and my science teacher saw the book and had a very dramatic negative reaction. And I just, at the time, I thought it was very funny that my science teacher was reacting to religious superstition, but that's neither here nor there. But I have run into minor negative interactions, but for the most part, it's just people don't understand.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just it made me curious about your own background. I mean, did you stumble into witchcraft, or was your mother a witch? Was your grandmother a witch? I mean, is there a lineage to witchcraft, or I mean, how does one sort of become a witch?
Yeah. So, one of the things I always say is if you ask three witches the same question, you'll get four different answers. So the way I look at things, there's no such thing really as a born lineaged witch. There are definitely people out there whose families have had some sort of witchcraft type practice and they pass that on to their children. But you can at any point in your life decide or choose or assign that title to yourself. So no, I wasn't born into a family of witches. I was actually born into quite a secular family with no religion. I wasn't raised in a church or anything like that. And in my teens, I went through sort of a dark night of the soul and I started seeking religion. I read all the books that I could find, and I'm in a very white Protestant area of California. So there's not a lot of options, spiritually speaking. There's no synagogue in my town or anything like that. So I did a lot of reading, and this is pre-internet. So the library was my friend, and I stumbled across a book about witchcraft. I just randomly picked up a book at a bookshop in the 90s about witchcraft, and it talked about earth worship and a goddess and being connected to the environment around you. And everything I read in this book, it felt like it was already what I believed. It was already what made sense. And that was it. I just started voraciously reading and finding everything I could about witchcraft. And in that timeline, witchcraft and Wicca were very much the same. It's not necessarily true anymore. But I did all the studying I could. And again, I'm in a very progressive little bubble where I live. And there was a public witchcraft ritual. And at the age of 17, I attended my first ritual with other witches who are strangers. And that was it. I was like, this is my home. This is my heart. I've found my spiritual path. And here we are many years later, still figuring it out, still walking that path.
Well, we're going to get into what modern witchcraft is and what it isn't in a moment, but I'd like to go back a little bit, if I may, Phoenix, to something you alluded to earlier, which is how modern witchcraft evolved, because we have as you say, medieval notions of witches.
Yes.
King James, for example, in this country wrote a book about witchcraft, and
Yes.
there was the Salem witch trials in the United States, etc., etc.
Yes. Yes.
So you talked about the sort of late 19th century. There was a kind of renaissance in witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about? Where did it come about? And what was its genesis?
Yeah, it really did start in England. There was just a cult resurfacing in the late 1800s. And in the Victorian era as well, people got into seances and reading about the occult, and all of this got very in vogue. It was very cool to be into the occult. And so there was this resurgence. But especially the UK is really where the birth of the modern witchcraft movement happened. In 1951, I believe, is when the witchcraft laws were repealed, where it wasn't illegal to call yourself a witch anymore in the UK. And there was a man named Gerald Gardner who published a book right after that law was repealed and became very public and was like, I'm a witch and I have been for many years and we exist. And there's, pros and cons to Gerald Gardner. But he became a very public witch and wrote books and initiated other people. And even now into the present moment, there is a flavor of witchcraft called Gardnerian Wicca, which is based off of Gerald Gardner's writings and his early practicing and the people who were practicing with him and in the supposedly the 1930s into the 1950s. And that's had a huge influence on the modern moment, but also the resurgence in curiosity about the occult and the afterlife and what happens to us when we die, which really did start in the late 1800s. And then, Gerald Gardner initiated a bunch of folks. One of those gentlemen was a man by the name of Raymond Buckland, who was a British man who came to New York and brought Wicca with him to New York. And that's sort of how Wicca landed in the United States. But we can look at the modern witchcraft movement and really see Gerald Gardner's influence. There are other hands in the pot, and it's evolved. The 70s, there was a huge resurgence because of the hippie movement and all of that. But really, like that 1951 repealing of the Witchcraft Act is a pivotal moment in our history.
Yes. I mean, I know a little bit about that era and some of that. And am I right in thinking that that in terms of witchcraft, it wasn't really what people might expect witchcraft to look and sound like, in the sense that it had more to do with folklore, much more to do with sort of the land and the environment, and a sort of return to a sort of rustic idyll, if you like. I mean, these elements were as I think, you tell me, they were as prominent as any kind of satanic worship or something like that.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. There are sort of two lines of magic, right? I'm using that word intentionally with quotes. One of those lineages is what sometimes is referred to as ceremonial magic or high magic. And we see influences of high magic going back even to the 1500s with different writers of the esoteric and the occult. But these were typically wealthy men who had access to tools and books and education. And high magic was very educated. It was very highbrow. It was the learned who had access to high magic. And then the other stream is what is called low magic. And that's how you said folk magic. That's the magic of the land. That's the magic of community. That's the magic of understanding the herbs that grow in our neighborhoods, right? The low magic, the folk magic. And a lot of folk magic is also connected to mythology. There's, every landscape has its mythology and its myths. And so there's a lot of crossover between the stories of the land and folk magic and these sort of two threads of high magic and low magic. And really, until the 1950s, they were very separate. And then they sort of got intertwined in a lot of ways. In some ways, that's getting pulled apart again in the modern movement. But it is interesting to look at both of those threads. Neither of them are connected to Satanism in any way, shape, or form. And that sort of layover came from Christian influence, where really the missionaries of the time were attempting to stop pagan worship. They were,
Yes.
right, there was this movement to make everyone Christian. And so the easiest way to do that is to look at what someone's worship is and go, oh, right, yes, you believe in this horned deity that lives in the forest. That's actually evil. Maybe you shouldn't worship that horned deity in the forest. And that was a way of controlling the masses by taking away their gods and offering them something different because their god is evil.
I mean, it's interesting what you say, because you're talking of an era when Christianity was either the state religion or the norm. But certainly from the 1950s onwards, I would say,
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd agree, Phoenix, that certainly in the British context and also in the North American context, that the writings of people like Dennis Wheatley, for example, his novels, or a number of Hollywood films, and we could sit here and recite many of them, where the witch is the central figure or whatever, and it's as much a Hollywood confection as anything to do with Christianity. Would you say that Hollywood has a lot to answer for when it comes to the modern idea of witchcraft?
Yeah. I think Hollywood and storytelling in general really glommed on to the idea of the witch as an evil woman. And, you know, you could get me on my feminist soapbox on that topic for a while if you wanted to, but, you know, there is something to be said about demonizing a powerful woman. There is something to be said about that. And so, yeah, Hollywood definitely took that and ran. And I think if you look forward, or, you know, if we fast forward in time, especially into the 90s, then we have movies come out like Practical Magic and The Craft, and these movies where, yes, there may be this interesting line being crossed around what is considered evil or bad magic or whatever, however you might want to look at it, but it also shows empowered women using their power. And so I think, you know, there is some influence of Hollywood. And like personally, I love it all. I love the movies where the witches are evil. I love the movies where the witches get empowered and save the day. I love it all just because it's getting the word out there, even if it's scary.
Well, I suppose as well, I mean, in Hollywood's defense, there was also Bewitched, which was a very popular series. And I don't know whether it advanced the cause of witchcraft or not, because it made it all seem a little bit silly. It was a little bit of a soap opera. But anyway, Hollywood played around with the image, and the witch was just one of those staple devices that you would use in storytelling, as you say. But going back to the evolution of modern witchcraft, and you've touched on it, Phoenix, already. There seems to be a sort of a number of things which were not sort of peculiar to witchcraft, but more sort of new age, shall we say. And they were things around the environment and around health, but also sort of alternative ways of looking for spiritual fulfillment of some way. I mean, you know, you used the word seeker, and a lot of the New Age movement were people seeking. It wasn't quite sure what direction they were going to. It wasn't a fixed point in terms of a religious dimension. Would you say that in a way witchcraft, as it's evolved into that, has become a sort of, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but a sort of subset or a part of that kind of New Age umbrella that people use in this sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is a branching off that is connected to the New Age movement for sure, because there is this way that the New Age movement made it permissible. You know, the New Age movement is love and light and high vibration, and I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but you know, it is more about high vibe and healing the earth and that energetic. So I do think that there was a way that witchcraft sort of branched off or melded with the New Age movement, and I see a lot of that. A lot of folks who find their way into witchcraft through the New Age movement, and vice versa. And I think that they're related. I think maybe distant cousins now, the New Age movement and witchcraft. And also, you know, in the 80s, especially in the United States, there was this whole satanic panic thing that happened. And so there was a lot of pushback against witchcraft and anything that maybe even slightly demonic. And I think the United States, generally speaking, is behind Europe as far as being secular. We're still a little bit caught up in our puritanical roots, unfortunately. However, there was a movement in the 80s and the 90s to sort of take the fear of witchcraft away. And so there were organizations like the Lady Liberty League here in the United States, which worked to help bring Wicca and witchcraft more into the mainstream and make churches who have nonprofit status, at least here in the United States, and to give really legitimacy to the practice of witchcraft. And for example, one of the things the Lady Liberty League fought for here in the United States is if a soldier dies, instead of having a crucifix or a cross as their grave marker, they can have a pentagram or another type of symbol of witchcraft, right? It really legitimized practitioners of witchcraft. And part of the way they did that was by saying, oh no, we don't worship the devil. No, we don't sacrifice babies. No, we don't cause harm. We don't do curses. We don't do any of those negative things. It's all love and light. And we believe what we put out there comes back to us threefold. And so there was a way that sort of the teeth of witchcraft was filed down in order to make it palatable to the larger culture. And I think that we've come to a pendulum swing to the other side of that now, where people are now saying, well, yeah, we do want to see the good in people, and we don't sacrifice babies, and we don't believe in the devil, but a lot of witches aren't opposed to cursing. A lot of modern witches aren't opposed to doing the spell work and the witchcraft that could potentially cause harm to another individual or what have you. So, that drive to legitimize witchcraft did sort of take some of the intensity and maybe the fear out of it. And, I'm speaking very generally from an American perspective because that's my history. And there's a lot more that we have to wade through in the United States, unfortunately, with that whole secular religious thing. It is curious to see where it will go. And because I have, decades of experience, I've watched this trail and what's come in and out of style, even in the witchcraft community. And that New Age movement is one of those things that sort of came in to vogue in the witchcraft world. And now people are sort of turning away from that New Age movement, that it's too soft and it's too love and light and it's too high vibe, but it's not actually focusing on the here and the now.
Well, you've got me thinking, Phoenix, because I kind of like the sound of this. What you were saying, these sort of, because they were witches, but they didn't do any harm to anybody. But you say the vibe is moving in a different direction. The popular conception or misconception is that there is a left-hand path and a right-hand path, and there is and certain witches go down one or other. I mean, is that the sort of thing you're discussing here? That people, are there witches that worship Satan and maybe do terrible things to people?
So there are people who worship Satan, but they're not witches; they're Satanists, right? So in my opinion. Again, if you ask three witches the same question, you'll get four different answers. But in my opinion, the devil, Satan, is part of the Christian mythology. So it is part of Christian belief. And so Satanists are sort of the anti-Christians, if you look at it that way. But they are worshiping and working with a deity that is part of Christian mythology. Most witches don't work with that deity. Most witches don't. Although there are witches who work with Jesus, and there are witches who believe in the divinity of all of that mythology. So to each their own, right? It's your own path that you get to figure out.
Sure. So is modern witchcraft and the sort of world that you're inhabiting, is it really a kind of return to kind of pre-Christian, pagan, heathen ideas that were around in the British Isles, certainly before the dawn of Christianity? Is that the sort of trajectory you're on?
Yeah, I think the majority of folks who step into witchcraft are looking for those indigenous folk practices. They're looking for practices that connect them to the land and to the energy of the land, and even to this idea of polytheism, and that there are many gods. And I think, again, from an American perspective, we don't have the same relationship to the land as someone in the UK might. My ancestors haven't been here very long. So I also look to my lineage, right? My grandfather's Norwegian. So I'm looking at my Norwegian roots and the gods that my great ancestors may have worked with and the spirits that my great ancestors may have worked with. And so there is this way to re-indigenize ourselves. I think that's a huge part of it. And I think a lot of witches are looking to find those roots and to find those practices of our ancestors that existed before Christianity took over. And I think that, sometimes that makes us pagans, right? And I think there's a lot of witches who identify as a pagan or a polytheist. It's a way to reconnect.
It almost sounds, I don't know if you'd agree, that the word witchcraft is, in terms of branding, is a kind of misnomer, I'm wondering if really you are sort of neo-pagans or neo-heathens or neo-Celts or neo-Norse god worshippers. The word witchcraft is so loaded, and I know you said you kind of enjoyed the Hollywood backwards and forwards with it, but it is so loaded, and also, and I think you've alluded to this, and I probably agree with you, that it stems from really a Christian understanding, whereas what you're involved with, I think, and what your contemporaries are, is something which predates Christianity and goes back into the mists of time in Europe and beyond. Is there a way, is this a discussion to be had in modern witchcraft, what to call ourselves?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And that has been an interesting argument to watch play out, especially on social media, as younger people come into this path, how they're looking at it and how they're viewing it, especially with all of the influence of social media. The label that we call ourselves has drastically changed. When I was a young teen, the word witch felt good because I was, a young teen and I wanted to be that punk rock vibe and tell everyone to, screw off. And so I wanted that word witch to be scary. And then as I got older, I did want that acceptance. And Wicca became the name, the label, because a lot of people understood what Wicca was, or it didn't have that same intensity as the word witch. And then that morphed into pagan or neo-pagan, right? We're just re-indigenizing ourselves. We're finding our roots. We're finding our way back to the land. And now this sort of modern current of the labeling is back to witch, because there is this pushback culturally. Again, sorry to focus on the United States here for a second, but we are facing fascism in the United States. It's pretty freaking scary right now. And so folks who are marginalized are looking to ways to feel more powerful. And witchcraft is a way to do that. It is a way to take your power back, to feel empowerment, to feel like you actually have some control in the mad, mad world that we live in. And so that label of witch has become popular again. It's very interesting to watch how the tides change.
Yes, it's interesting. So at the moment, would you say that the whole kind of New Age movement, and I'm not sure where we're up to with that, has sort of gone its own path or run out of its own steam or whatever you say, and that witchcraft is about to head off in a new direction?
Yeah, I think that's already been happening for the last little while. I think really since COVID, there's been a clear branching off of the New Age movement and witchcraft. And there's a lot of similarities. So there will always be some crossover. There will, distant cousins will always be related. But I do think that the paths are moving in different directions. And the New Age movement is sort of taking on its own flavor and its own identity that is different than the current witchcraft movement.
And would you say that the people that you encounter are... whether it's California or London or wherever, that they are people who are searching for some kind of spiritual identity. And that, do you get people who are trying out your variety of spirituality before they move on to something else, or maybe they stay with you? I don't know.
Yeah. Because of how I teach a lot of introduction to witchcraft type classes. So I do get a lot of people who are exploring their spirituality for the first time ever. who are new to this whole concept, who stumbled across witchcraft randomly and are curious and want to learn more. And some of those people stick around. Some of those people find, because under the umbrella of witchcraft, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different traditions or ways to practice or ways to initiate, or however you might look at it. And so sometimes those people are just looking for their right home under that umbrella. And sometimes there's just the dabbler who comes in sort of like a butterfly testing out different flowers, and they get a little taste of witchcraft and then they move on and find another taste of something. And the way I look at it, because this is my spiritual path, me personally, I think it's all great. I think that spiritual development in whatever way it comes for a human is valid, and it's important, and it helps to give our lives more meaning. And so I think if someone shows up and they find their home, it's beautiful. And if someone shows up and just gets a little bit of information and education and then flips onto something else, I think that's beautiful too. I think our spiritual paths are so uniquely individual that everyone's going to have their own journey and their own way.
Now, Phoenix, you talk about a spiritual path, and many people will understand the idea of the concept of a Christian spiritual path, which leads to heaven, hell, or and also, in Islam, there's something about paradise as well, etc. So most religions, we have some idea of that. I'm not clear where the path of witchcraft leads. Where is the progression here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say the majority of folks in the witchcraft world believe in some form of reincarnation. So, our soul, our spirit, our energy is on its own journey. And each life that we are born into is evolution of that journey. And not everyone looks at it that way. Some days I believe in reincarnation. Some days I think that once I die, that will be it. And my body will return to the earth. And that's the form of reincarnation I'll take. Every day, every hour, my feeling and opinion on it changes. And, death is the greatest mystery for us. We won't know until we get there. So I don't try too hard to try and figure it out. I think the difference between an afterlife and focusing on the afterlife, and how maybe most witches or pagans look at the world, is instead of doing good deeds for some supposed afterlife, or focusing on, well, once I die, I'll be in heaven. Well, what about now? I'm only given these few precious years to exist on the earth that I know about. How about I do my best to be the best now, to do the best for the lineages that are going to come, to take care so our descendants have something beautiful to live in as well. And I think that, again, it's kind of a re-indigenizing. It's how people look at keeping our earth safe and clean for our descendants. And I think that's a difference between this heavenly afterlife and the lives of our descendants.
Would you say that modern witchcraft is polytheistic or atheistic?
Both of those things. I know. I would say the majority of the witches I know are polytheists. They, believe in the many gods. But I also know quite a few witches who consider themselves atheists and don't believe in any type of supreme being or divine being, and they're more focused on the earth and the relationship they have with the earth and the living beings of the earth. So I think both of those things are true, but I do think my experience has been the majority are polytheists.
Now, this is my last question, and I slightly hesitate to ask it, Phoenix, but I will anyway. And it's this: has Harry Potter advanced the cause of witchcraft, or turned it into something which it never should have been in the first place?
I think things like Harry Potter and even like the Thor Marvel movies, right? And anything that sort of brings awareness to the potential of something different, to something magical, to something other, I think it's good. My practice looks nothing like Harry Potter. If I could just wave a wand and fix my glasses, that would be amazing, but that's not the reality. So, but I think any gateway that brings someone to explore their spiritual path is beautiful. So I think Harry Potter is great for the cause.
Now, some people watching this will have very clear views on witchcraft as a kind of dangerous pursuit, I guess.
Yep.
Do you ever feel that there is a danger inherent in this path that you're on?
No, I mean, so I do look at karma, right? This concept of karma, the energy I put out into the world is going to come back to me. And if I'm a generally negative, angry individual, when I look out into the world, I'm going to be reinforced with those beliefs. And if I'm generally a positive, high-minded, see the good in people type of individual, when I look out into the world, it's going to reinforce those beliefs. So I don't feel any fear about something being evil. And it's been a long time that I've walked this path. Are there evil things that can happen? Absolutely. Is there, as you referred to it, left-handed magic that people practice and could be trying to harm other people? Yes. Yes, that's valid. But that's not my path. That's not where I focus my energy. That's not where I walk. And that's not how I teach this path to other people. If you want to spend your time doing negativity, you don't have to be a witch to do that. You could be in any faith to do that. And it's just a waste of our precious human energy.
Yes, I know. I completely agree with you on that. You don't have to be a witch to be negative. That's a given. Okay, Phoenix, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find out more about you and this world of modern witchcraft.
Yeah, the Google is your friend. My website is phoenixlefae.com, and it's LeFae. I do have lots of books out there, and as I said at the beginning, there's no doubt a witch in your neighborhood. So don't be afraid to seek out your local metaphysical shop and ask questions and be open-minded.
For now, Phoenix, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.